Now, Assetto Competizione, it's no secret, it's my favourite racing game out there at the moment. It's more along the lines of a sim, because it mimics how GT cars behave in the real world extremely well. I'd say better than any other game or sim out there at the moment. However, enjoying the game and being fast on it are two very different things, as we know. So in this video and in this new series, I'm going to try and hit every point I can that should help you find some performance on the game, because as we know, every game has its own tricks. So a bit of a disclaimer to start with, GT4s, I haven't done too much driving with them in ACC or reality, so I don't feel qualified to talk about them as such, so all the stuff I'm saying in this video and the series ahead is GT3 specific. Now, GT3 cars are fast, I think we all know that, but at the same time as being fast, they are heavily aided, so they've got TC, ABS, all these driver aids, which are quite weird when you first start to use them. The reason they have them is for those gentleman drivers or amateur drivers in the real world. It makes it a more easy and fun transition for them, so they can get in, be decent off the bat, less spins, less chance of crashing. It just helps them acclimatise to a racing car. So in turn though, the way you get the lap time from a car like that is completely different to the way you get lap time from a Formula car with downforce. So that's what we're going to look at in this series and this episode, is how do you get the lap time from a car, a GT car that's good on the brakes, good acceleration, bad in the corners, it's got driver aids. There's a few tips and tricks you need to know, and that's what we're going to look at. The aids like TC and ABS, you want to use these. I know in F1 obviously it's better to use no assists, but in this game you want to be using the in-car aids to be fast. And it's the same in reality as well. I'm using TC and ABS all of the time. Using lower values is usually the way to go in the dry. In the McLaren, TC1 or TC2 along with ABS 3 or 4 is usually about right. Each car differs obviously, and in the wet you want to increase these values as there's less grip, so it's far easier to lock up or break traction. Now, these cars you can drive with a little bit less finesse than a car with, say, no assist, because if you get it wrong, put the power down too early or go too hard into a braking zone, you've got the TC and the ABS to save you. So in that sense, I wouldn't be too afraid of being too aggressive in these cars. A word of warning though, just make sure you're using the in-car assist, not the in-game assists, because the in-game assists are a lot more intrusive and they'll cost you a hell of a lot of lap time. On the brakes, into a heavy braking zone, hitting 100% on the pedal initially is what we want to do still, but instead of bleeding off quickly like you do in an F1 car, you have the ABS to stop you locking up, so effectively keeping the brake applied has two benefits. The first reason being it helps you slow the car down more, meaning you can brake a little bit later. It's quite an obvious one, but it's worth saying. And the second reason is a bit more complex, and that is it helps use the weight transfer of the car to give you more turn-in on corner entry. Understanding weight transfer in a GT3 car is crucial if you want to drive it fast. And there are so many ways in which weight transfer is used when driving the car, but it's especially important to utilise under braking. If you come off the brake too quickly, then the front end of the car is going to lift up, and what that gives you is understeer. So it's not good to have understeer, but if your setup is struggling and you've got a bit of rear instability going into corners, otherwise known as oversteer, you can use this weight transfer trick or characteristic to get round the issue by inducing some understeer into your driving. Obviously you don't want understeer, but sometimes it's quite nice. GT3s are heavy cars. They have a lot of grunt though, but at the same time they don't go through corners or change direction very well, especially slow corners. With this in mind, you want to make sure you're minimising the amount of time you're turning, otherwise known as V'ing off the corners, and using the car's strengths like braking and acceleration as much as possible is really key. On the flip side of the coin though, as we've already mentioned, you need to minimise the amount of time you're turning in these cars, because it's definitely the car's weakness. The other benefit from doing this is that if the car is straight on the exit, it's less likely to break traction, meaning the TC won't kick in as much and you'll have a faster exit from the corner. Engine braking is also something you need to implement into your driving to give you more stopping power. It's very easy to do this too quickly though, trigger the downshift protection, which will delay your entire downshifting process, meaning you'll overshoot the corner and miss the apex. Each car is geared differently, so there will be a certain rhythm in each car which will be the fastest way to go down the gears into a braking zone, which will help you stop the car quicker, and this is something you'll figure out over time, so don't worry if you don't get it straight away, it comes with practice. Like any racing game, using all of the track available to you and figuring out what curves you can and can't take is essential to finding those final few tenths. Some cars in this game take curves better than others though, so if you're in a McLaren, following a Mercedes for example, don't assume you can take the same amount of curb when following, because if I'm being honest with you, it could end very, very badly for you. The wet physics in ACC are the best of any racing game out there at the moment, but they're not 100% realistic, and the main difference between realism and the game is that the racing lines you take in real life are completely different to the ones you take in the game. All you need to know though, in ACC, just use the dry line everywhere, with the only difference being you need to avoid the curbs as they get super slippy and unusable when it gets wet. When it goes from wet to dry conditions, it's seriously OP to use the drying line, staying off the wet surface as much as possible. I mean, all those things are quite realistic traits in driving. It's not always an obvious thing to do, because the drying line may not be the optimal racing line you'd be taking in the dry conditions, but it's still quicker than dipping your wheels onto the wet tarmac and losing tyre temp and grip. However, when you're doing this, your tyre temps and pressures may go through the roof, so if this is the case on the straights, find puddles and standing water to cool them down slightly before you reach the next corner. My best advice for anyone starting to play the game would be choose a car you like, make sure it's fairly competitive at the majority of tracks, and then stick with that one car. Now, ACC only consists of GT3s and GT4s, but each car within these categories behaves very differently, and they all need to be driven differently, and they all need to be set up extremely differently to be quick. So if you think about it logically for a minute, you've got a Merc with the engine at the front and all the weight sat on the front axle. It's going to handle, and the setup's going to be completely different naturally to a Porsche, where the engine's at the back and all the weight's on the rear axle. Now, over the course of a championship, you need to understand each car will have its strong tracks and weak tracks, so don't expect to choose the Porsche, for example, and then beat people using the McLaren at Silverstone. However, when you get to Nürburgring, you'll have an advantage on those same guys using the McLaren, so you need to be consistent more than anything and understand you won't win every race. Over time, the more sessions and races you do, you'll understand not only how to drive the car on a qualifying lap or over a race distance as the tyres drop off, but you'll understand the little tweaks required on the setup of the car to make it feel a certain way to suit your driving style. So if we take Malinowski in the Porsche, for example, he's been driving that car for months, understands it inside out, along with his driving skills. That's why he's ridiculously quick. I'm starting to get there now in the McLaren. There's plenty of examples out there. It just takes time to both drive the car on the limit and set it up correctly. If you're constantly changing cars, your progress will be slower, trust me. But a little present from me to you. Each car in the coding of the game has an optimum wheel rotation to use. So for the McLaren it's 480, for the Porsche it's 800 I think. Anyway, I've put them all in the description below, so go and check them out. I found they made a huge difference when I used these, so you're welcome. Also, for all you Fanatec users, I've put the FFB settings I used for my V2.5 Club Sport and my CSL Elite wheel before I got my SimCube. They're also in the description below. To all of those using Logitechs and Thrustmasters, I haven't used those wheels on this game, so I can't really recommend any settings unfortunately. But what I would say is, whatever wheel you are using, make sure your FFB isn't clipping first of all, very important. But secondly, always have the wheel profiler FFB at 100% if you can, and adjust the in-game FFB to suit, as this is the way in which you get the best feeling from the game. In an ideal world, you'd be running as much FFB as possible before it starts clipping, because that way you'd be getting as much information from the game to your wheel. But equally as important that you are comfortable and you're not struggling to turn the wheel after 3 or 4 laps, because as we know on ACC, the majority of the races on this game, they're fairly long. Alright then, for this first episode, that is a wrap, but this is the first of a 5 or 6 episode series containing everything you need to know from my point of view if you want to be fast on assettocorsacompetizione. So some of it's like this, quite generalistic. I find this stuff very interesting, but some of it's a bit more technical, a bit more boring, I suppose, but you need to know it to be fast, so I'd recommend watching all of them. But then again, I am a little bit biased. Anyway, on your screens you're going to see the topics we're going to cover over the next few weeks. The videos won't be too separated, don't worry, but if you did enjoy this one, give it a thumbs up, sub up to the channel if you don't want to miss any of the other episodes coming up or any other videos coming up in general. But as always, massively appreciate you watching this video, hope it helps, but until the next video, I'll see you soon.